everyone. Welcome to another What I Would Have Done Thursday. I apologize that this video is being uploaded late. Unfortunately, I've been relatively busy this past week, but I should have all of the videos that need to be uploaded today by the end of today. So without further ado, for this particular What I Would Have Done Thursday, I thought it would be interesting to briefly address a film that I remember seeing quite some time ago, at least when I was young. And it's one that kind of bothered me initially when I saw it. And I initially saw it with someone who was, I guess you could consider a friend at the time. And for some reason, she liked it, and I was not really the biggest fan of it. And I think it just goes to show that people have various opinions when it comes to this, especially considering the fact that it is probably somewhat nostalgic, considering that it came out at least around the time I was a kid. But it's just one that's always rubbed me the wrong way, and I really felt could have been executed a whole lot better. And as you can see by the title, as well as probably thumbnail, we're going to be addressing the film Drop Dead Fred. In case anybody is not familiar, Drop Dead Fred revolves around none other than a imaginary friend named Drop Dead Fred, who is involved in this girl's life, in particular a girl named Elizabeth, and they kind of end up causing a bunch of mayhem, at least when she was younger, and he suddenly appears within her adult life, supposedly to try to help her. But as you will see throughout the film, he progressively sort of makes her life miserable, and it really doesn't produce something that I would consider of good quality. And I think that largely stems through the relationship between Drop Dead Fred and Elizabeth, this real main character, technically, of the story. But it's just bad on just so many levels, this film. I'm so sorry, but that's just my honest opinion about it. I mean, I just felt like that there was just a lot of annoyances, and those annoyances could have definitely been significantly minimized. And I think first we need to start with the relationship, because the relationship between Elizabeth and the Drop Dead Fred imaginary friend, I think, is a totally really skewed and very kind of almost overly sinister, relationship, in the sense that, a lot of what Drop Dead Fred and Elizabeth do, especially when their children is especially when Elizabeth's a child, is they cause a lot of mayhem and a lot of destruction, and it doesn't end up resulting well with Elizabeth and her family. So I really don't see why this relationship is in any way, shape, or form productive and helping Elizabeth, even initially when she's a child, because she and Drop Dead Fred just cause so many problems, and just cause tons of mayhem. Now, I know children are supposed to be, they're not supposed to be 100% angels, and yes, they do bad things once in a while, but the way they take this particular relationship, I think, is a little bit more onto the extreme side, especially when you see them really messing up things and, just kind of almost doing things that are either kind of just embarrassing or humiliating to people, or they'll do it for the sake of, trying to annoy other people. And I think that's really the problem here. I think if there was a little bit of mischief caused, for maybe even a reason, like, let's say, somebody's kind of being rude to Elizabeth, and her imaginary friend comes in and tries to, help her out or save her or do something, kind of more productive, then I see the trickery being utilized in a way that is maybe not so, one-sided. And I felt like this relationship was really on the one-sided angle of children are evil and cause destruction. side and not necessarily balanced out all too well. And I think this would have led to a lot more development and a lot more interesting angle had they focused more in on the relationship, again, having this balance of mischief, but at the same time having this sense of productiveness, like, that Drop Dead Fred is actually helping Elizabeth instead of really kind of working against her and, kind of tearing away at the relationships that she has with her family. Um, and even in the beginning, they even make the mom just a complete one-dimensional character too. So, uh, and just make her kind of the enemy. And I think that's also very messed up and sends a really bad message to kids. Like, yeah, your parents are evil. They just want to cause you problems. And ain't that a nice message to send to, you only find real comfort and real love through an imaginary friend. I just find that kind of just messed up. So I don't think they took a very good approach with this relationship. It definitely needed to be a little bit more productive, not as chaotic, and that would have significantly allowed for a more in-depth discussion about this concept of an imaginary friend, which I think is interesting, and I think this film actually has a lot of interesting ideas, but the way they are executed is totally botched, and it really starts with the relationship between Fred and Elizabeth. So I would have definitely made significant changes to that relationship, and I think the crux of that is to make it a little bit more balanced and not as, one-sided, and make it all about creating mischief and mayhem and destruction all the time, and pulling pranks on people. So that would, I think, have helped significantly. Also, let's talk specifically about Fred the character. Now, Fred, the imaginary friend within this film, is annoying as okay, I don't want to say he's Jar Jar Binks annoying, but he is up there. I mean, this guy is just unbelievably obnoxious. I mean, he is just so loud, and just every time I hear his voice, it just sends a it just rubs me the wrong way, and the way in which he says certain things rubs me the wrong way. And I think that largely has to do with the fact by what he's doing, because he ends up causing a lot more chaos and destruction in Elizabeth's life than actually really genuinely helping her. I mean, he is not a friend to her, really. I mean, throughout this entire film, pretty much. I mean, all he does is cause more problems and create and basically not provide any solutions. The whole point of an imaginary friend, at least for I think children for the most part, and why they sort of create these friends, is so that they can have some kind of help, psychologically, maybe dealing with loneliness or feeling neglect, not to cause a ruckus and try to, you know, uh, be chaotic. I mean, I think there is a lot more reasonings behind as to why children, develop these kinds of, you know, imaginary things within their mind. I mean, obviously, too, I mean, you could even consider dolls sort of an imaginary friend because they're not really real life. I mean, yeah, there's a real doll, but it's not a living thing. But sometimes kids will treat it like a living thing because, it's a way of them sort of bonding with something because they may not be getting that same bond from people that are, within the real world. And so that's why they kind of developed this imaginary friend. And I think that would have worked itself out well had they done that with Fred. But what they do is they make him a complete, they don't provide a significant balance with his character by, putting in some heart and some kind of sense and logic to his behavior. A lot of it doesn't make a whole lick of sense. Um, So, and a lot of the times when he pops up, he's just annoying. Um, so again, I think he definitely needed to have a more likable personality. And I think you can still make him a little bit obnoxious, but you don't have to go overboard. And I think, unfortunately, this film went way too overboard with that, and it resulted in it being very just mind numbingly hard to sit through because Fred is such a dominant part of this film. And plays such a huge role in it. And I think that's really what made me angry too, is the fact that a lot of the film is really wasting your time with how much craziness, Fred sort of brings into Elizabeth's life. So, that's, I think, another thing that would have helped had they changed him uh, significantly as far as a character is concerned. Now, as far as plot, this plot I think could have definitely been a lot more simplified and less confusing because again they do kind of go to flashbacks, which I wouldn't mind necessarily them doing, but the problem is a lot of the flashbacks don't really produce anything, and they don't really end up. We don't really end up even really realizing why Elizabeth sort of creates this imaginary friend. Um, it's just kind of like he's there, and there's no real explanation to it. Um, or at least some kind of reasoning behind it. It's just kind of like he's just there. Um, and I think had they developed a little bit as to when he was kind of initially created, and if certain things kind of served a purpose to either build up the plot, build up the character development, and an understanding more of Elizabeth's childhood, then I think we would have gotten something a little bit more interesting. Because the film, the way in which it executes it, it just feels so jumbled and all over the place, and it doesn't seem to hold a whole lot of water. Um, and I think had they just focused on, um, you know, giving the flashbacks some kind of significance, then that would have definitely helped. Also, again, with the plot, I think, you could have just had it be, she's down on her luck as an adult. She feels lonely, and isolated, and then basically the imaginary friend comes and supposedly kind of just helps her get her life kind of back together, so to speak. I honestly don't think they needed the one guy, her husband or whatever. I mean, I think, they could have done sort of like a romantic comedy out of it where she feels lonely, she doesn't have anybody around, and ultimately her imaginary friend sort of helps her get friends and maybe a potential love interest. The imaginary friend helps her, you know, socialize, and you could have done this in a comedic way, I think, in certain respects, like maybe sometimes what the imaginary friend suggests maybe doesn't really work out, but that the imaginary friend has good intentions and he's not trying to be a complete jerk, unlike this movie where he is a complete nutcase. So I think that would have at least helped. Um, and obviously, you could question whether or not she actually really does have an imaginary friend. I mean, you could have played with that, but I mean, I think just kind of her retreating back into creating a friend would, I think, at least make sense, considering the fact that if she's had that friend in childhood and she's feeling in the similar state maybe to where she was in her childhood, where she feels alone, neglected, and not appreciated, so she creates a friend to sort of fill that void. Um, and again, you could have had other people, that were like her who had imaginary friends too, supposedly, which they kind of tried to do at one point, but it didn't really pan much out to anything. I think they could have had something going there, and she could have actually developed actual friends who had imaginary friends too, who were kind of, again, trying to fill that void that she has. I think that could have worked to a certain extent. Um, and basically, you know, that this could have played out, I think, in a variety of different ways, and it would have been, I think, more productive and a little bit more effective than just, again, just being it about how basically Fred just screws everything up, you know, which is really what the initial film was really doing, and instead replace it with a Fred who's a little bit more productive and not as and is not trying to, you know, ruin her life unintentionally, you know, just kind of have some imaginary friend that's a little bit more level-headed and not constantly messing with her. Um, so again, I think, you know, had these changes been made, had there been a little bit more focus, and again, you know, you didn't need to and there's some ridiculous scenes too where they try to make it so that people actually believe that don't, again, have imaginary friends actually believe that she does. And I think that should have been completely scrapped. I think that I think what could have been done is she knows that, you know, even since childhood too, you know, that she kind of has a psychological thing with this imaginary friend, and she knows that that might make her look crazy. And so um you know, so whenever, I guess, Fred is around, he doesn't really, you know, meddle in or try to mess with her, which is really what he does within the film. And I think that's way too counterproductive and makes her look even more insane. Instead of just kind of Fred being kind of helping her at a distance, instead of constantly being in her face. Um, so I think that would have worked out a whole lot better. And yeah, you could have had moments where, you know, Fred's trying to maybe give her some advice, but, you know, it might not be as productive of advice, or, you know, it's maybe a little bit more childish too, because, you know, was around when she was a kid, and so he kind of acts a little bit more like a child as opposed to an adult. But the level in which they go to obnoxious child with Fred's character within the film is really what puts it in the coffin and makes it really drop dead Fred almost. So yeah, I think, you know, those things of, you know, making the plot a little bit more simplistic and straightforward, while at the same time providing a sense of character development, as well as, you know, making Fred's character less annoying and more likable. Um, Again, having the whole relationship be a more productive relationship than a very destructive one. Um, you know, I think all of those things would have allowed this film to be a whole lot better. Um, and I think really that's, I think, the most important things that I can at least think of when it comes to improving this film. And it really is down to the meat and bones of what you would expect a lot of films to really provide, which is a good relationship between the main characters, a good story. And again, a lot of these things are definitely, I think, missed, unfortunately, within this particular film. But I think that's really ultimately all I can say about it, though. However, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care.